The colony was quiet that evening. Lights glowed across the royal courtyard, and music drifted from the tall windows of the palace. Families from the nearby city had gathered outside the gates, watching as banners waved in the warm wind. Inside, nobles and guards walked among the decorated halls. Among the guards stood a man named Luke Carter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his armor shined under the lanterns. But unlike the others, Luke did not laugh or boast. He stayed in his post, silent and watchful. Many of the younger soldiers often ignored him, thinking he was too quiet, too dull to notice. But the Princess Claire always felt safe when she saw him nearby. Claire was young, not more than 10 years old, with bright eyes and long hair that framed her face. She was curious and often asked many questions, but she noticed that Luke never answered with many words. Sometimes he only nodded. Other times he said one or two simple things. To her, his silence was not strange. It was steady. That evening, the palace was filled with laughter. The Queen Alina had allowed the celebration to honor a new treaty. Guests filled the ballroom, and music filled the air. But outside, in the shadows beyond the walls, not all was safe. Men who wished to harm the royal family had crept into the city. They waited for the right moment to strike. Luke stood at the edge of the courtyard near the garden path. His eyes moved across the trees and the gates. He rarely looked at the dancing nobles or the glowing lanterns. His hand rested on his weapon, calm but ready. He felt the cool night breeze, but kept his body still. To him, silence was not just the absence of words. It was a shield, a way to hear what others missed. Claire noticed him from across the garden. She walked over, her small shoes tapping against the stone path. When she reached him, she tilted her head and asked, "Why don't you ever smile, Luke?" He looked down at her. His face was strong, but kind. He gave a small shake of his head. "Smiling is not my duty," he said softly. She giggled. "Then what is your duty?" His eyes shifted to the gates. "To watch," he replied. Her smile faded for a moment, as if she felt the weight in his voice. Then she nodded and stood close to him. She liked being near him, even if he said so little. The music grew louder from the ballroom. Guests raised glasses and cheered. But Luke's eyes never left the shadows. He saw something move near the far wall, a flicker of motion that did not belong. His hand tightened around his weapon. Claire followed his gaze, but she saw nothing. "What is it?" she whispered. Luke did not answer. His body stiffened, and his silence deepened. He stepped forward, gently guiding Claire behind him. His heart slowed, not from fear but from focus. He had lived in silence for so long that moments like this felt familiar. From the darkness, a figure appeared, dressed in black and moving swiftly. Then another followed, and another. Luke counted them in his mind. Too many for the guards inside to notice quickly. He knew they were not here for the queen. Their eyes searched for something smaller, easier to take away, glanced at Claire. Her eyes were wide, but she trusted him. She stayed close, gripping the edge of his armor. Luke stood tall and steady, his weapon ready. He did not call out or shout. Words would waste time. Silence gave him strength. The night that had begun with music and laughter was about to change. Danger was near, and Luke knew his duty. He was the shield between the princess and the world. The sound of footsteps grew louder as the dark figures entered the courtyard. Their faces were hidden, and their weapons glinted under the soft light. They moved with speed and purpose, like shadows that had come alive. Luke Carter did not move from his place. He kept his body steady, his eyes locked on them. The other guards were still inside the hall, unaware of the danger. The music drowned out the soft crunch of boots against the stone. The little Princess Claire clung to Luke's arm. She was afraid, but her trust in him kept her from crying out. Luke raised his weapon slowly. His movements were calm, as if every second stretched longer than it should. He did not shout for help. Nay, he knew if he did, it would only draw the attention of the men closer to Claire. His duty was clear. Protect her first. One of the intruders stepped forward, his voice low and harsh. "Hand her over. No one has to get hurt." Luke did not answer, like a wall. He shifted his stance, placing his body in front of Claire. His hand squeezed the weapon, ready. The man growled, giving a sharp signal with his hand. At once, two of the intruders rushed forward. Luke's eyes narrowed, moved fast, firing a shot that struck the first man before he reached the steps. The second swung a blade, but Luke blocked with his arm, forcing him back with a strike. Claire gasped and held tighter to his side. She had never seen such violence so close. Yet even as Luke fought, his face remained calm. Silence was unbroken, his focus sharp. The intruders hesitated for a moment, but more of them spilled into the courtyard. Luke knew this was no small attack. This was planned and their target was clear. They wanted the princess. He stepped back slowly, guiding Claire toward the garden wall. He kept his weapon raised, firing when the men drew too close. Each shot was measured, never wasted. The silence of his nature matched the rhythm of his fight. Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "Luke, are we safe?" His eyes flicked to hers for a second. He gave the smallest nod. That was enough for her. She pressed her face against his armor, trying not to look at the bodies on the ground. Another intruder charged at him with a spear. Luke twisted aside, pulling Claire behind him, and fired again. The man fell, his weapon clattering against the stones. Still more kept coming. Their numbers seemed endless. Luke felt the sting of pain as a shot grazed his side. He did not flinch. His body moved on instinct, shielding Claire, returning fire. He knew he could not hold them forever, but every second mattered. Inside the palace, laughter and music carried on, unaware of the battle outside. The guests raised their glasses, and the queen continued to greet her people. The world inside was still safe, but outside, Luke stood alone against the storm. The intruders pressed forward, circling him. One threw a smoke bomb, and the air filled with a sharp, choking mist. Claire coughed, holding onto Luke's arm. He pulled her close, his body bending over hers, protecting her from the smoke. His eyes watered, but his vision stayed clear enough to aim. In the haze, he fired again, each shot echoing across the courtyard. The intruders fell one by one, but others pushed through the smoke. Luke's breathing grew heavier, but his silence never broke. He thought only of the girl behind him, the small life he had sworn to protect. He would not allow a single hand to touch her. The fight seemed endless. Every time he struck one down, another took his place. But Luke kept moving, his strength steady, his duty unshaken. Claire, though frightened, felt a strange calm wash over her. Even in the middle of danger, she believed he would not let her fall. At last, the sound of more boots echoed from the palace. The guards inside had heard the noise. Shouts filled the air as reinforcements rushed toward the courtyard. The intruders faltered, their attack breaking. Luke lowered his weapon only slightly, his eyes scanning for any hidden threat. His body ached from the wound at his side, but he stood tall. Claire looked up at him, her small hands still clutching his arm. In that moment, she understood something. He was not just a guard, it was a shield, silent but unbreakable. The courtyard was heavy with smoke and the smell of fire. Broken lanterns flickered against the stone, and shadows twisted across the walls. Luke Carter stood with his weapon raised, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His wound burned, but his body stayed firm. The Princess Claire pressed against his side. Her hands shook, but she refused to let go of his arm. She looked up at him with wide eyes, searching his face for a sign of fear. She found none. Silence was as steady as ever. The intruders regrouped at the far end of the courtyard. Even as guards from the palace rushed in, the attackers did not scatter. They shouted orders, their voices sharp and angry. They wanted the princess, and they were willing to give their lives to take her. Luke shifted his stance, keeping Claire behind him. He fired again, his shots striking true. Each movement was careful, each step measured. The world around him blurred into chaos, but his focus stayed clear. Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "Luke, are they going to take me?" His eyes flicked toward her. He shook his head once, slow and certain. That was enough to calm her heart, even as fear clawed inside her chest. The fight grew harder. More intruders climbed over the garden wall, their weapons flashing in the firelight. The palace guards were brave, but many were unprepared for such sudden violence. Some fell quickly, and others cried out for help. He moved forward like a wall of stone. Bullets struck his armor, sparks flying, but he did not fall. His silence made him feel like more than a man. To Claire, he looked like an unshakable statue that had come alive to guard her. The minutes felt like hours. Luke's body ached, and his wound bled beneath his armor, but his will did not bend. Every time an intruder came close, he pushed them back. Every time they aimed at Claire, he blocked their path. At one point, a rebel soldier slipped through the smoke and grabbed Claire's arm. She cried out in shock, her small voice breaking the night. Luke turned with speed, striking the man down before he could drag her away. His silence turned into action faster than words ever could. Claire clung to him tighter, her trust now complete. She no longer doubted. She no longer feared as deeply. She knew he would not allow anyone to take her. The palace bells rang in the distance, warning the city of the attack. More guards flooded into the courtyard, their armor shining in the firelight. The intruders began to falter, their confidence breaking under the weight of resistance. Still, Luke did not lower his weapon. His eyes followed every shadow, every flicker of movement. He knew the fight was not yet over. The smoke cleared a little, and Claire finally saw the bodies scattered across the stones. She shivered and pressed her face against Luke's side, not wanting to see more. Her small voice broke the silence again. "Why do you fight so hard for me?" Luke looked down at her. His lips moved slowly. "Because it is my duty," simple words, but to Claire they felt heavy with meaning. She held on to them, holding on to him as if those words were a promise stronger than steel. More palace guards formed a wall near the gates, forcing the intruders back. The rebels shouted to each other, but their movements grew weaker. They had not expected such resistance, had not expected one silent soldier to stand like an unbreakable mountain. Luke's vision blurred for a moment as pain struck through his side. He tightened his grip on his weapon and forced himself to stay upright. He could not fall, not yet. 3 minutes had passed since the first shot. To him, it felt like a lifetime. To Claire, it felt like the longest moment she had ever lived. But in those minutes, a bond had formed stronger than words. Then, a voice rang out across the courtyard, strong, commanding, and filled with fire. The guards around Luke stopped for a moment, their eyes turning toward the palace gates. Claire lifted her head, her tears glistening as she looked toward the sound. Her mother had come. The sound of the queen's voice cut through the courtyard like thunder. Every soldier turned toward the palace gates as Queen Alina stepped forward. She wore no crown, only a long, dark cloak that flowed behind her. But the power in her eyes was brighter than any jewel. The palace guards moved aside as she walked, her steps steady, her face set in stone. At her side were the royal guard, soldiers chosen for their skill and loyalty. Their armor gleamed as they spread out, forming a wall around their queen. Claire gasped with relief when she saw her mother. She reached out, but Luke kept her close, his body still shielding her from the fight. His chest rose heavily, blood seeping from his wound, but he stood tall as if nothing could move him. The intruders faltered when they saw Alina. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his face, growled in anger. "Take the girl now, before it is too late," he shouted. They rushed forward once more, but Alina raised her hand. Voice rang clear, sharp as steel. "Stand against me, and you will fall." Her guards charged with her command, their blades striking, their rifles firing. The sound of steel and fire echoed across the courtyard. The palace guards who had already been fighting gained new strength, their courage lifted by the presence of their queen. Luke did not leave his place, continued to shield Claire, his weapon firing at every shadow that broke through the line. His silence was unbroken, his face calm even as blood stained his side. Elena's eyes found him in the chaos. For a moment, her expression softened. She saw her daughter pressed against his armor, safe behind his steady frame. She understood at once what he had done. The battle raged for minutes that felt like hours. The rebels fought with desperation, but their order broke apart. Some tried to flee, but the palace gates were sealed. Others were struck down where they stood. Claire held tightly to Luke's arm, her small body trembling less now. Her fear faded as she watched her mother fight. The queen was a figure of strength, her voice commanding, her presence unshakable. Together with Luke, she felt as if no harm could touch her. The rebel leader tried to push through, swinging his blade at the queen herself. Alina blocked with the help of her guard, their blades clashing in sparks. Luke saw the danger, and for the first time, he broke his silence with a single word. "Down." Claire ducked without question, pressing low against the stone. Luke raised his weapon and fired, the shot striking the rebel leader in the shoulder. The man stumbled, and Elena's guards seized the moment to bring him to the ground. His cry echoed across the courtyard before silence fell. The fight was over. The smoke thinned, the firelight dimmed, and the courtyard was filled with the heavy sound of breathing. The rebels lay defeated, their weapons scattered. Guards moved among the wounded, securing the ground. Elena stepped forward, her cloak brushing the stone as she approached her daughter. Claire ran from behind Luke and threw herself into her mother's arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were mixed with relief. Luke lowered his weapon at last. His legs trembled, and the pain in his side grew sharper. Yet he remained standing, his silence steady, until the Queen's eyes met his once more. Elena placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, then looked at Luke with deep respect. "You stood when others would have fallen," she said quietly. "You did not speak, yet your silence shouted louder than all their cries." Luke said nothing. He only gave a small nod, his face pale from blood loss. Claire pulled away from her mother and returned to Luke, holding his hand. "He saved me, Mama," she whispered. "He never let go." The Queen's eyes softened again, filled with something more than gratitude. She knew this soldier had not only protected her daughter, but had given everything of himself without asking for reward. The courtyard that had been filled with chaos now stood quiet. The night was heavy, but peace was slowly returning. Still, the image of the silent soldier guarding the princess remained in every heart. The courtyard slowly grew quiet. The smoke faded into the night air, and the sound of battle was gone. Guards moved across the ground, gathering weapons and tending to the wounded. Now Queen stood tall in the center, her arms still holding Claire close, but her eyes remained on Luke Carter. He leaned against the stone wall, his weapon lowered at his side. Blood marked his armor, and his face was pale, yet he did not fall. His body trembled from the pain, but his silence did not break. To him, the fight was not truly over until he was certain the princess was safe. Claire slipped from her mother's arms and ran back to him. She grabbed his hand, her small fingers wrapping tightly around his. "You did it," she whispered. "Shh. You kept me safe." Luke gave her a faint nod. He did not smile, but his eyes softened for a moment. Queen Elena stepped toward them. The soldiers around her bowed, but she did not look away from the man who had stood alone when the attack first began. She stopped in front of him, her voice steady. "You have done more than your duty, Luke Carter. You have carried the weight of a kingdom in your silence." Luke lowered his head, saying nothing. Claire tugged at his arm, speaking for him. "Mama, he never moved away from me. Even when they hurt him, he stood. He saved me." The Queen placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. Her touch was firm, filled with gratitude. "Your silence will not be forgotten. The people will know your name." The palace bells still rang in the distance, carrying the news of attack across the city. Soon, word would spread of what happened in the courtyard. It would not be the story of the rebels or even the victory of the royal guard. It would be the story of one soldier who stood in silence and faced death to protect a child. The guards came forward to help Luke, but he shook his head, unwilling to fall in front of the princess. He stood tall, even as blood soaked through his armor. Only when he was sure that Claire was safe in her mother's arms did he allow himself to lean on the support of the others. They carried him toward the infirmary inside the palace. Claire followed beside him, refusing to let go of his hand. She whispered again and again, "I am here, Luke. I am here." Inside, the healers rushed to care for him, removing his armor and cleaning the wound. Through it all, he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the small figure of the princess who waited by the door. When it was done and his breathing eased, Queen Elena entered the room. She stood beside her daughter, her eyes fixed on the man in the bed. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she spoke softly. "The kingdom will remember this night. But more than that, my family will remember you. You are not just a guard in the shadows. You are a shield, unbroken, unspoken, and true." Luke gave the smallest nod. He did not need to answer with words. His silence was enough. Days passed, and the story spread across the colony. People spoke of the rebels, but what they remembered most was the image of one soldier standing in front of the princess, his body battered but his spirit unshaken. They called him the silent soldier, the man whose silence saved a life more precious than gold. Claire visited him each day, sitting by his side and holding his hand. She told him stories, her laughter soft in the quiet room. She no longer feared the night, for she knew someone like Luke was in the world. The queen gave orders that his name would be honored, not just within the palace, but across the kingdom. She wanted every child to know that courage did not always shout. Sometimes it stood in silence, steady as stone. And so, Luke Carter, once a quiet man overlooked by many, became a living legend. His silence was no longer seen as emptiness. It was strength, louder than words, stronger than fear. He had protected the little princess when all hope seemed lost, and in doing so, he had given the kingdom a story that would never fade,